Good morning, everybody. I've got 10 minutes to talk about saving the world, I think, so I better move quickly at it. I can't seem to get my, have I been given share option?
Yes, you should be able to share your screen. Is it bring?
Not yet. 1 second. Is that visible?
No, it's showing up, yes.
Yes, okay, that's good. Okay, moving quickly along. Just a little bit of background on Hydrogen Mobility Ireland, HMI, formed early in 2019. 13 commercial members, 4 policy stakeholders, and academic links like DCU, who've already been mentioned, and Belfast Met. Delivered a full roadmap for the rollout of hydrogen as a workable zero-emission fuel at the end of 2019, and is currently becoming a company by limited guarantee. For Ireland, the challenge of decarbonising transport is fairly massive, and I suppose trying to show that Ireland is not just a good potential market for hydrogen fuel cell trucks, but that we can't deal with these problems in any effective way without hydrogen fuel cell trucks. So transport is the second highest CO2 producer in the country after agriculture. But when you look at some progress being made in agriculture, the challenge of trying to decarbonize on the transport side is particularly big. And while transport is often seen as a sector that includes leisure driving, let's say, it is also the sector that provides commuting to and from all of the other sectors, and also delivers and collects all of the products of those other sectors. So if you like, part of the responsibility for decarbonising in transport also rests with those end users who to some degree need to be incentivized, because for them the cheapest option is often the first choice, and that's not usually the environmentally best choice. Ireland has produced a very strong climate action plan, updated this year, and it sees 1 million electric cars on the road by 2030 and a 7% per annum reduction, totaling about 51% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions by 2030 to be set in legislation. And transport obviously has a fairly key focus in this, with no diesel-only purchases of buses and some other vehicles immediately in that case. And when we look at the challenges facing the sector, and you look at solutions, often there's a discussion or a debate about which is the best solution, battery electric or fuel cell. And certainly from our viewpoint in Hydrogen Mobility Ireland, it requires both. These are not competing technologies, but ones that support each other. And I think it's going to require both to deliver on a project of this scale. If we look at distance driven, which is not the only issue, I think, and not the only issue affecting choice, but it is a very good place to start. And if we look at the diagram there, transport and environment have produced a view of the future, which would suggest that by 2050, 2/3 of the heavy vehicles on the road are likely to be EVs, and the other third fuel cell vehicles. And they see distance driven as the key factor of affecting the choice by the end user, based, I think, particularly on price. And I don't know if it's the only issue for choice, but the line on which the decision is made is roughly that 480 kilometers a day, which underlines the point at which that choice might be made. And yet trying to make calculations to see how that impacts on replacement, what sort of vehicles, what numbers might be needed, and what sort of savings can be made, can be quite difficult because a lot of the data available is fairly general average mileages. And as an example, CSO, the Central Statistics Office, showed the average mileage for goods vehicles, combined light and heavy, at 22,400 per year. And of course, you would say that's well within EV ranges, but that is hundreds of thousands of vehicles, some very large mileages and some very small mileages. So I've tried to look at some other area, and Road Safety Authority collect odometer readings at the point of vehicle testing, heavy vehicle testing. And their data shows that the average for two-axle HGVs is about 48,000 per year and three axles is 73. And when we go to look at the types of vehicles recording over 100,000 kilometers per year, which is in the territory that that Transport and Environment have indicated, it includes about 5,000 heavy goods vehicles over 7.5 tons, about 700 light goods vehicles, and about 700 buses and coaches. But of course, they're not the only vehicles that would have regular requirements to travel over 480 kilometers a day. That's about the return journey between Dublin and Cork. So there are many people in the commercial vehicle world who would, if not doing 100,000 a year, make that journey and have to make that sort of journey per day on a regular basis. So I think the position is wider. In HMI, we've tried to take the view that the best people to talk to about what is needed and what needs to be delivered for transport users are those people themselves. And we've established a vehicle end user group, and these are going to be, and these are key people very enthusiastic for the project, including some very big operators in their sectors, from heavy vehicles to coaches and buses to logistics and taxis, but also their national representative organizations, so that we can get an overview of the impact on their sector. And it was in that context that DCU had worked with them to survey operators. This is a particularly challenging time for transport operators in Ireland, given not just COVID, but Brexit as a challenge, as well as the issue of facing the challenge of decarbonising over the next number of years, and with no zero emitting options currently available. And when you think of the decision to change your vehicles now for a new lower emitting diesel vehicle or some other fuel that's equally or is low emitting also, but not zero, a concern as to how that vehicle will be treated. Will it be penalised at some point in the next number of years? And you know, what's the residual value of such a vehicle likely to be? And whereas that's not going to stop fleet replacement at a time when we really do need to reduce emissions, it is likely to dampen it down. And if we look at the chart that's there, you will see, while there's an average of 6,000 or thereabouts vehicles registered for the first time in the heavy goods sector in Ireland each year, only about 2,500 of those are new vehicles, and about 3,500 are used heavy goods vehicles imported from the UK. And you'll see over that period, there has been a significant growth in the number of imported used vehicles and a drop in the number of new vehicles. If you look at 2020, and while there has been some impact of COVID in there, it reduced down to 2,000 vehicles in the year, but the used imports have continued to stay at a high level. That transition to a zero emission fleet for Ireland, and if we look at it, is pretty enormous. The replacement of the fleet is driven by two things, really: the number of new registrations and the percentage of those registrations that are going to be zero emitting. And if we look at this, we've only had an average of 2,500 heavy goods vehicle registrations over recent years, if 6.5% of those new heavy goods registrations are zero emitting, that's the same figure, by the way, as the figure for electric vehicles registered in Ireland so far this year, which is actually growing on what it had been in the past. But if it was 6.5, it would take 200 years at that rate to replace the fleet. If it was even up to a third of those registrations being zero emitting, it would still take 50 years. But of course, if we're talking about percentages on that 6,000 overall figure, a third would replace the fleet in 20 years. And a third of that 6,000 would actually replace half of the fleet in 10 years. And if you think the target set by the government in legislation is to reduce emissions by 50% over that period, that's a nice sort of join up between the two figures. If that were to go to 50% of that 6,000, you could actually target to see the whole fleet turned over by mid 2030s. Now, it's not a linear thing. It's not going to stay at that percentage. It will start lower and will go up to almost 100% towards the end, but it's talking about that sort of average that we're looking at. The Sustainable Energy Authority of Ireland has also looked at the heavy vehicle fleet. 40,000 heavy vehicles are in the fleet in Ireland, and 45% of them are 10 years and older, which is obviously a concern. And they say if transition doesn't occur, the danger of locking in a large cohort of heavy goods vehicle to diesel over many years is likely. And that's in the context of heavy goods vehicle activity likely to treble in Ireland between 2015 and 2050, which is the period that they had looked at. Again, the greater size and weight of heavy goods vehicles, which we know substantially increases the barriers to batteries serving as a substitute for diesel. And in their view, again, policies to favour alternative fuel vehicles should incentivize the sale of new technology to the point where it overcomes initial barriers and begins to achieve a greater market share. The state has already moved with some, provisions in that area, support grants for purchase of alternative fuel vehicles, which does include hydrogen fuel cells, ranging from 40% to 60% of the differential in price between the equivalent standard fuel vehicle and the vehicle they're looking for. But of course, it needs a range of such supports to make this work for end users. The DCU survey, and it hasn't been released and it's not finalized, and I know they are still collecting in information responses from people in the sector who are willing to make the submission. But at an early stage, they did share some information with us, which is 63 fleet operators at the time, representing almost 3,000 vehicles. And it showed that the respondents showed the most interest in hydrogen for decarbonisation. 49% of them were interested in being directly involved in a potential shared project by aggregating their orders to bring hydrogen trucks to Ireland as early as possible. If, as an example, a HMI project to aggregate orders could deliver 500 hydrogen fuel cell heavy vehicles to replace high mileage diesel HGVs, the emission savings would be the equivalent of about 20,000 electric vehicle cars replacing fossil fuel cars. So if you like, the return for funding and supporting such a project is really huge for the state in terms of seeking to meet its targets. In those responses from those companies, one of the amazing things to me is that here are hard-nosed business people looking at their business and all the pressures of price and everything else on it. And they are very interested in seeing a solution that at the moment is relatively expensive, is an unknown technology for them. In many cases with vehicle producers they have not dealt with before and who have no support infrastructure in Ireland. And yet they see it because it fits more closely to the models that they need. And I think issues of lining up plug-in times for recharging vehicles with rest breaks for drivers required by tachograph requirements, I think is a potential nightmare, and the reality of the road that it is very likely to match on the occasions that they are urgently needed. In relation to one of the key pieces of this, which is the supply of hydrogen for the vehicles, I think you could say this should not be a problem. There are at least 2 green hydrogen projects in the West Coast, I think very close to planning submission, if not already there, who suggest they might be coming on stream as early as 2022. That remains to be seen, but very, very quickly, I think. And a recent announcement by the ESB of a 1.4 gigawatt Green Atlantic project coming on stream, hopefully somewhere in 2028. And I think a rather excited, but not too far off the mark, local politician suggesting there's an almost limited supply of wind energy offshore on the west coast of Ireland, with up to 70,000 megawatts based on a report by Shannon Voinsport Company, and the opportunity for Ireland to become a major producer of hydrogen for global export, but of course also producer of hydrogen to help decarbonize the transport sector. For us in HMI, one of the key challenges and one of the key parts is the rollout of, and I'm sure everybody involved in hydrogen infrastructure, is refueling stations, because it really is a challenge for investors in that sector to see very small numbers of vehicles which need to be supported, but volume required to make it a self-funding or profitable enterprise is going to take some time. In fact, one of the key issues for the early producers of hydrogen is because potential customers either in energy or in industry will take some considerable time to change over the systems to use hydrogen. The presence of larger numbers of heavy vehicles using hydrogen from the earliest stages is actually a key part, I think, of the requirement of those who will be producing hydrogen. So they're all very self-supporting. HMI has produced a rollout plan which will start, like many of these projects, with a hub around a major city, probably Dublin, and rolled out to other major cities, and followed by motorway strings. And I think if you look at the map, we have tried to ensure that hydrogen can become what would you say, a very practical fuel for use. If I look again at some of the overviews by organizations like ASEA, the Vehicle Manufacturing Organization, and they show a project for Ireland and they suggest 2 or 4 hydrogen refueling stations would suffice. And that's really down to averages and numbers of vehicles. It doesn't take account of, if you like, the size of the country, the length of journeys, and the fact that you need to support people to get to zero emitting transport for their locations. A key part of what we have there is the 10T network, given that it will be, we believe, a requirement at European level to provide hydrogen refueling for vehicles coming to Ireland from the continent. We should invest early in that and gain the benefits ourselves, because it will really be the backbone of a national infrastructure for refueling that I think will reassure those people who will want to make that shift to hydrogen. I mentioned earlier that there is a key challenge, a debate between many people about hydrogen and electric vehicles and which option and so on. But I have to say, for me, with my many years experience in the motor industry, the key issue is really you should never put all of your bets on one technology. It is a very risky and I think a bad strategy, because we don't know at any stage if what seems to be the best solution today, and that could be any of the ones we're looking at, could turn out to be a cul-de-sac, because something that we don't yet know will actually make it not what we thought it was. And if you need an example, just think how the whole world saw diesel as a very strong solution to reducing CO2 from transport, but that view changed fairly quickly over a period of time. So it really is a hugely important strategic issue to support more than one solution. The picture there, I don't know if people know it. It's a car called Jamais Content. Amazing that an electric car in 1899, in the 19th century, set the world land speed record. The first vehicle to go over 100 kilometers an hour. It went to 106 kilometers an hour. Amazing, and you would have thought that electric vehicles would have kicked on from that, but it had range issues, and after each run for the timing, it had to recharge, and petroleum products came onto the market very cheaply, and wisdom at the time was they provided a far better option. You just wonder where we would be with battery technology and electric vehicle technology if the two options had been backed at that stage and electric vehicle range had continued to be worked at from 1899. So listen, thank you very much. That's my